Oh, okay, there we go. Okay. Hey, y'all. Hey. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Hello,
Shoot, I
everyone.
forgot if this is first. Thanks for joining, y'all. The conversation today is going to be partly about the EPPP, the examination for professional practice in psychology, and psychology licensure. But really, we're going to be looking at and talking about what life looks like beyond licensure. So, if you're not a licensed psychologist, what life could look like, where you could still have impact. We'll also touch on the adverse impact and the disparity within the field of psychology specifically, but globally within the mental health field, because a lot of these different licensure exams are doing the same thing within our community and our world. And then Dr. Bethea will also share a bit about her journey and alternatives that we can tap into to be able to still have impact within the field of psychology and for mental health with the communities that we want to touch. So I am Dr. Robina Onwong'a. I am an early career psychologist and professional. I'm provisionally licensed, so I'm in the process of trying to get licensure. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. And I am one of the 7 co-founders of Radical Psychs, which is one of the co-hosts for this today, where we are championing for equitable practices for licensure in the field. And then I will let the great Dr.
Oh,
Bethia introduce
all right.
herself.
Hello, everybody. Good to see everybody. Great to be here. I am Sharon Bethea, PhD,
Period.
president. Period. 2 periods. So I'm the president of the Association of Black Psychologists. I'm also professor at Northeastern Illinois University in Chicago, where I run the African American Studies program, and I am a professor in counselor education, and I'm also the co-founding member of Genocide and Human Rights Center for Africa and the Africa Diaspora. We lovingly call it GRAD. Yes, that's kind of where I live. I'm which I usually start with, but I'm Goldie Mae's daughter, Robert Matthias, and Louis Rogers' daughter, and I'm John Irving Sharper's mom. Glad to be here.
Love it. Thank you for making time. I know you are constantly busy, especially as you accepted your calling to be the current president of the Association of Black Psychologists. So you're in meetings all day, and we appreciate your presence here and what it represents for us to be able to have somebody who is not only an advocate, but actually out there doing the work to make sure that our people are receiving culturally appropriate and sustainable care. And so I want to start off by asking you about your journey, because we have folks who are in here who are students, undergraduate, all the way up until mid-career professionals. And one of the questions that we got was, what did it look like for you going through your journey into being where you are now? So as much or as little as you would like to share.
Okay. Ooh. I'm of I often tell people I'm a elder in training. So I'll be 65 on my birthday. So it's been a journey.
Wait, hold on. I didn't know that.
65 in April. I'll be 65 in
Okay,
April.
okay.
Yep,
Looking
yep.
good.
Oh, thank y'all. So well, I would say this journey began, I don't know, from the beginning. So this notion of me being born in the segregated South, even though segregation supposedly happened in 1954, 1960, where I lived, it wasn't segregated. They actually decided to build us new schools instead of go to school with us. But for me, that was an advantage because everybody, all my teachers and all my role models and everything around me, I actually didn't know there was such thing as white doctors because we were segregated. My doctors were white, the owners were white.
What a life.
I mean, I'm
What a
sorry.
world.
They were Black. I'm sorry. I lived in this total Black world where all the doctors were Black. All the owners of everything was Black because we couldn't cross that imaginary line. So when I did in 5th grade, sit behind the first white person ever was interesting. So saying that, all this notion that I've always been immersed in a Black world, and that's kind of all I knew. So when I went to school, it was always me navigating, understanding not only a Black world, but a Black world where we clearly did owned everything. I'm from Durham, North Carolina. They called that a Black Wall Street. I didn't live on Black Wall Street. We didn't have money like that, but that was the representative and the role models that we had. So I always had this inkling about the power of being Black, the power of being of African descent. So as I navigated the gatekeeping, because of, you know, school K through PhD is this gatekeeping process and this socialization process of you being immersed not only in Eurocentric thought, but the notion of how do we say it back in the day? White is right. That if you didn't follow that path, that pretty much you weren't going to make it through. But that's not how I was grounded. So when I went to undergrad, searching for a space and place, I ended up in Dr. Noble's class, which is African Black Psychology.
You were so blessed to be able to end up in a space like that at the beginning of your
at the beginning, right?
process.
It was like my 3rd year. I was an undergrad searching because I was at a PWI, I was at San Francisco State, and I heard about this class. And in this class, he made it mandatory that we buy Blacks. So all of our books were going back from a Black bookstore. And we were required to go to the Association of Black Psychologists conference that happened to be in Oakland that year. So again, and if anybody knows, I don't know, I was a student. I was very young in my 20s, and now I'm the president. So we don't go away usually. And so now being steeped in this understanding of what African-centered or the science of African-centered or African Black psychology is, that was my journey. So then I get into graduate school. PWI, even wider, because as we notice, as we go further up in degrees, that there are less of us there. And so I'm from California, so we lived in a space that it was all about testing. It was all about being licensed. That's just the California way. And so I remember getting through my master's program, and literally, not only do we do a pretty rigorous program, they teach us the licensure. It's like along the way, you're learning the concepts, how to do it, what the test is about. We're practicing after every class. It was so annoying, but all steeped in Eurocentric ways of being. So school is my superpower. It's like, you know, we're brilliant and we all have superpowers, and just for me, school is my superpower because I learned very early, good grades got you. Because I could be a little menacing when I was young. I was the only girl. But as long as I had
I'm not surprised.
grades, as long as I had great grades, nobody would believe that I did it. And so I learned very on, and I actually loved school. So being in that, I did well, even though it was a all-white school doing that thing. So at the end of that program, we had to do a mock taking of the licensure exam, both written and oral. And I killed it. Just this, you do the studying, you have your little support group, and then I remember the whole notion of you're ready to take the exam, and we actually got our exam by examiners, so we really knew we were ready. Something hit me. Them and saying, I am not going to participate in your gatekeeping, and literally walked out and said, I'm not doing the license, almost in revolt of what it means, the questions, even though I had, for lack of a better word, mastered the licensure exam, it was so antithetical to my Blackness, right? Even in learning, I always had to have this compartmentalized brain where this is a game, so I had to play the white game over here, but deep in my spirit, I'm African, always have been, always will be. And so in that moment, I thought I can make a choice. So I did. And I chose, and my professors, come on, chose not to this day, I don't have a license. A choice I made then when I was in my master's program. And so I just found more creative ways to do my work because I did all the same work. I'm not saying that getting a license is not necessary. I'm not saying that. But for me, it just wasn't for me.
Yeah.
And I've done every bit of kind of work you could think of in the field of psychology and counseling you could think of without a license. And when I did it, because there were students who needed services, there was a point where I worked in schools who needed services. And to get services, you had to be a licensed professional. That's why you think about, I always tell my students, keep your Rolodex. But I had friends who also had a license. So what I would do is like, I need to do this. Because of course I could diagnose, I could do all those things that I learned to. But can we do this under your license just to get this kid through? And then I would do my work. Because usually when you're assigned somebody, as long as that criteria is met, they don't really care about you working with them. It was never this rule
Because
of,
they need the support within those systems. Like there's such a low capacity of resources within a high level of need. So you have the competence, but
yeah. But so, and I guess for me, it's finding opportunity spaces and places where my competency was more important than that license. And it, because even, for instance, I was a supervisor for the University of Chicago. And people often ask, how do you do that without a license? And I remember getting students an internship in the program that I was running and calling and saying, I don't have a license. They said, but we looked at your video, we looked at your resume, and we know your expertise. It was more important for me, for them, for their students to get that expertise. They would find a way for licensing to happen, or they had a clinical person in their program. Even right now, I'm full professor in a counseling psych program, and am I maybe the only one not licensed? And so I remember them telling me there's courses I couldn't teach. But what you do is you do the research. Because when I dug deeper, it does specifically say to supervise students in a master's program that you had to have a license. It says that when they go into their practice, there has to be a license. And mostly all internship spaces had a licensed professional, which i.e. means that I can teach the class. And a lot of these rules changed at certain places. So I got grandfathered in. Now I'm full professor. I teach any course I want to. So it's more working the loopholes. There are way more loopholes than you know. Those loopholes are not for us. And they pretty much bank on that we're not going to find them. And I'm going to say that sometimes the fight wasn't hard. Or I always make sure I was in spaces and places where my expertise was necessary. I've always wanted to work with my community. Always.
Okay, so before you go there, Dr. Bethea, because I know you could drop a lot of gems. I want to take a pause so that we can talk a little bit about your decision to actually not even go through with the EPPP after they had that mock exam and you knew that you'd be able to be competent, but you didn't even attempt it. So for folks who are joining, the EPPP is the examination for professional practice in psychology. It is the licensure exam that the Association for State and Provincial boards uses to say that, hey, if you pass this exam, standardized exam, then you are set to go off into the field and provide services, professional mental health services to anyone with a license, and you don't have to be under somebody's supervision. So for folks who have doctorate degrees, whether it's a PsyD, a doctorate of psychology, a PhD, which is a doctor of philosophy, in one of the practicing psychology fields, whether that's school, counseling, or clinical psychology. Other people can take the exam too with other psychologies, but those are the three that practice. You still have to go through the doctoral program, and some folks even at the master's level, but you cannot practice independently if you don't pass this examination. And we know through research that different people have done independently that there are disparities to where our white colleagues in the field, they are able to pass at significantly higher rates on the first attempt than other folks of color. So our Black folks, brown folks, we have data specifically for Black and Hispanic folks. And I think there's also data for other folks of color, but I'm just speaking to ones that I'm very knowledgeable about. And then Radical Psychs, we also did a survey that my friend and colleague, Dr. Chanel Baptiste, put together, and we collected hundreds of responses from Black folks specifically who had an experience with the EPPP. And we had people ranging from folks who had passed on the first time, but then individuals who have taken the exam upwards of 12 times. Folks who have given up, folks who have lost their jobs, folks who have not been able to continue to practice in the field because they have maxed out their attempts, given the different structural laws that are in place or policies that are in place saying that if you don't pass after the third time in your state or province, then you either have to wait 2 years to go back and take it, or you can't do it again. So people try and do it in other states. So there's a lot of policies that are in place that some of the state boards, some of your state boards, actually, those members don't even know about that they exist. But our mission is to shed a light on that and to find ways that we can get more Black, brown, and other people of color into the field, or even find alternatives that they can still support the mental health of our communities outside of this gatekeeping system. So I'm talking to the president of the Association of Black Psychologists, Dr. Sharon Bethea, and she was just saying that she decided that she was not even going to go in that direction. So can you speak a little bit more as to how you felt so confident in that decision and why you decided to make it as a young graduate student?
One thing, even in the program, I did my research because, of course, I was nervous about the test. However that goes, and however that's,
Somebody
and
might be calling.
understanding the cultural bias in the content, understanding the disparities in the test outcomes, understanding how it was absolute gatekeeping, not only gatekeeping of the field, but literally barriers to entry on purpose by design, right? And so it exacerbates this notion of inequities within the test, right? They weren't very transparent. Like I said, I turned 65, so this resistance, you're still fighting that same battle like decades ago. So this whole notion of resistance to change, and absolutely no accountability. So just in studying the issues around pipeline issues and just this dominance and Eurocentric thought and practice, at some point, I'm just like, I'm not selling my soul, right? And again, I'm not saying that it's not important, and I'm not even saying that it wasn't important for me to do, because I actually wrote an article in a book called Beyond the 50-Minute Hour that I talked about some of the pitfalls of me not having a license, right? So I'm not saying that it's not important, that it is, that's just for me. I was like, yeah, I can't go down this road. So what else can I do differently? So in that moment, I decided, even though I've been playing the game my whole career, right? In my career, in my school, at this point I was getting my master's, that I just wasn't ready to do that one. And I'm actually going to say I'm not sure if I thought to myself, maybe down the road.
Yeah.
If it's necessary. But what began to happen is, as I thought about my own talents and my own expertise and what I can do, and me navigating the systems, I kept landing positions in spaces without it. And I think I might have a little struggle. I'm like, oh, today I'm going to go study for that license. I would take another avenue and I would be successful in it. And so I also started thinking of other ways I can have an impact. Yes, I wanted to, and you don't have to have a license in every setting, right? So I had to intentionally chase after those settings that I didn't. For instance, when I worked in the community at a community center, I could do as many groups as I wanted to because I gotten certified in group work, because you can use other certifications.
Yeah.
And they needed somebody to do the groups, so I did the groups. I was being paid well enough. And And so after a while, 1 year went by, 5 years went by, and I turned around. I'm like, I'm having a pretty good career, and I never had to sit for that license.
Mm-hmm.
So I just didn't. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was just that conviction I had about the gatekeeping. And not only the gatekeeping, what we were forced to swallow, and it didn't ever include any of our own lived experiences. Every once in a while, you might get this diversity question, right?
Yeah.
But it didn't talk about the lived experiences of my folks, my people, where I wanted to work. So I just, at that point, took a chance. Let's see what happens. I'm not going to do it. And so
Yeah, that
I
just
did.
makes me that makes me think about how we talk about within the Association of Black Psychologists, when you feel that conviction, when you make a decision, it's almost like the divine spirit, God, everything just aligns to make sure that you're supported in the decision that you make. And
Absolutely.
with that intention that you had in your heart of being able to do work that is supporting your community without compromising your values or your standard,
Absolutely.
that it still ended up working out for you.
Yeah.
Could you
And we
speak a little
won't
bit
talk
to
about the
you?
cost.
Yeah,
Really, as a
yeah.
graduate
It's
student
thousands
that
of
much in debt,
dollars.
the cost is crazy.
Yeah. The exam itself, I think now they're up to it costs $681. I know I have some of my folks in there who could correct me if I'm wrong. About $700 for the first attempt, or for each attempt. Every time you take it, you pay about $700. That does not include the material that it costs to, study for it, which they highly recommend, because without it, you're kind of flailing around. And at this point, some of the materials that people have been passing down could be outdated. And so some of the study materials vary from I don't like $150 per month. The programs that
Mm,
they really recommend are about $200 per month for basic packages, up to like $1,000 package programs. Um, and then there's also the state licensure parts of it. So the jurisprudence exam that you have to take, not state licensure, the ethical exams that you have to
mm,
take for each state. That also costs more. I know in California, they tax them. I don't know if it's like $300 or $500 to renew your license every so often. Then, the organization itself, the Association for State and Provincial Psychology Board, ASPPB, they make millions off of the
they
exam
make
yearly. As
millions.
Radical Psychs, we went and looked through some of the documentation that at least was public and saw that this is their bread and butter. Like, this is the biggest product that they have that they're able to sell. And in some ways, there's a potential conflict of interest because the state boards are buying this exam out from them to, use it as a measure for saying, like, okay, this person is ready to go and practice. And so then there's not really an incentive for them to back down from it, because if they do, it's going to cost them a lot of money to try to rethink or recalibrate what it's going to look like to now assess people and say that they're ready for that. So, yeah, all that to say, financial burden, absolutely, it's horrendous. It's horrendous.
It's horrendous. It is horrendous. And because the gatekeeping is one of the main reason why there's such an underrepresentation of us in the field, right? And I would say, I'm a conspiracy person, that's on purpose by design. And so
Mhm.
as much as we can get into
Absolutely.
in the field and make changes and do, and even at some point thinking through the license thing, what other parts of this can I be a part of? Can I be a thought leader? Can I be an advocate, right?
Mhm.
Professor, so I can impact other stuff. I can still do the research. You can
Yeah.
still do the work. I think sometimes they have us believing that you can't do this work without that license, so we stress over it.
Amen.
And so there's certain avenues we can't go into. But if we think about the non-access to mental health services that our people have, that our people are everywhere. We
Mhm.
can work with them in all kinds of settings. And even when I was doing the work, because I was prepared that way, so many offers to have private practice, but no, I couldn't set up a private practice. I'm in the state of California. I couldn't set up a private practice without a license. So I thought to myself, how can I still do the work? Oh, let's go to an agency that does the work. They pay me, and usually all the other structures around them were in place. So I could just go in and do my groups, do my even individual work. I did individual work. There's nothing, I worked in hospitals. I never thought I'd get into the hospital, but I was actually running a house for incarcerated pregnant teens. And the work that I did became kind of known in Oakland. Mm-hmm. And I remember having clients that I took to Children's Hospital all the time. And one of the doctors said, amazing the work you do. Would you consider doing it here in the hospital? And I said, I don't have a license. She's like, well, it's my practice. You don't need a license. And what she did, she set it up where while people were waiting for their appointment, I did therapy with them. I'm under her MD thing. She just made it part of her practice, that in her medical practice, there was somebody who did this work with her clients. So they would come in an hour early or 50-minute early. I would do counseling with them, with their kids. And so there's always these creative ways to do this. Because I think hospitals are one of the hardest places to do. I did that work for a long time in hospitals, right? Yeah. I teamed up, at some point I teamed up with a Black psychiatrist, and she had the license, right? So I did my work, she did her work, and we just used her psychiatrist thing because we were really doing advocacy work about how much our children are medicated. And she wanted my expertise along with what she did, right, to advocate for that. So, again,
I think the theme that I'm hearing, besides the divine direction, is also the ways that we can leverage our community and other people who are also on the same page about doing the work, psychiatry or other community mental health clinicians, as long as they're able to see that, okay, this person has had this training and background experience, they're competent in this way. I'm sure they had ways to kind of vet your expertise or knowledge in that area, and then allowing that to be a partnership that, yes, Ujima, the collective work, allowing that to be a partnership that happens. Yes, this will be available for replay. We'll upload it and make it into a podcast episode that we'll then share on the page for you all to have access to. There was a question about, okay, we talked about ways that you can practice as a clinical psychologist with a license, and or maybe let's say even without, outside of the United States. You've done work outside of the United States, in Africa, different countries in Africa. Yeah, talk a little bit about that, Dr. Bethea.
Yeah, of course, it's not the same licensing structure outside of the country, although APA is on I won't say satanic mission. Like, cancel, kind of. Mission.
you know, it's a safe space with me, but. Oh, see, look, they block it now.
They're making it harder, but of course, they haven't got to all 54 countries.
Oh, Dr. Bethea, you froze for me. I don't know if you froze for other people, but you froze for me. So may you start over with your response?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sure. So, again, I don't know where I left off. This notion that APA has an initiative, and of course, part of that initiative is using our Black faces, and yes, I meant the pun, to go into the continent of Africa and get them to agree to their rules, regulations, testing, licensure, and actually convincing people on the continent that is the only way to do psychology. Because if you know anything about other parts of the world, this notion of how we do therapy is not it's frowned upon in a lot of countries. Yeah. And so when I even think about doing the work on other continents, I totally move away from that notion of psychotherapy and psychology. And we have a conversation about indigenous ways of knowledge and healing. And I let the community talk about it. So what do you do? Who do you talk to? So it doesn't seem like this notion of this Eurocentric way of doing psychology. Now, the continent is quickly taking on the criteria of APA. I remember doing a consultation, and the same thing, consulting work, start your own business. If you're consulting around this issue, you don't have to have a license, period. But you're still doing the work. You're still using your talents and your skills and your superpowers. But I remember sitting in a room doing consulting work in a particular country, and finally somebody raised their hand and said something like, could you teach us how to diagnose? So I'm talking about indigenous ways of healing. We're talking about it, but APA had got to them, and I didn't know that at that point. And so I remember asking a specific question about a diagnosis, and everybody's like, but we don't do that as a people. It didn't even make sense to them. So I'm like, so why are you taking on the diagnostic way of doing psychology? Let's talk about community. So once I started talking about community and elders and relationships, things that they've done always, it became a smooth, and that you don't have to have a license for, right? And even trying to introduce our cerebral healing circles, which at some point, somebody I think said something like, aren't you imposing your ways of being? Okay. Because even explaining cerebral circles, which are steeped in foundationally in the principles of Africa or African values, particular tribes, they said what we missed was we didn't understand the impact of tribes. They'll tell us in America, don't use the word tribes, but that's what they call themselves, so I'm using it.
Yeah.
And so, but this is the tweak they gave to it, which I loved. And this is why I love working over in other countries. They said, have you ever thought about taking those circles out into rural areas? And maybe if you, with something like, maybe if you're really serious about this work, what if your interns came over here, stayed in different rural areas with different tribes, let them lead it that way and learn it that way? Great idea. I don't need a license to do that work, right? I can also teach these skills to the community so they can do their own work. So it's almost like, how do you, which will be more impactful if the community takes, if they take it on as their own.
Yeah.
So again, how do we create
like community-based participatory healing practices? Yeah.
That is our thing. If you think about your work, that is our African thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, can you just briefly explain what Sawubona healing circles are and the way that ABPSI does them?
Yes. So just quick story. When COVID hit, we were, how everybody was glued to CNN. We're like, oh my God, what is going? The world's coming to the end. What's going on? Remember, a bunch of Black people were dying at 2 to 3 times the rate of COVID. Our first responders were having a hard time, and we're all like, oh no. And all of a sudden on the screen popped up, pretty much if you're African American or Black, call the Association of Black Psychologists. We're like, what? So again, imagine our number popping up on CNN. We knew the whole world was watching CNN at that time. So in our genius, which we are, we came up with this notion of cerebral circles, which cerebral means I see you. Where we
I see the divinity in you.
Yes, absolutely. I see the divinity in you. I see you see me. And so, which is a African, and I would say across, everybody has a different word for it, but across most tribes is this notion of a different word from Ubuntu. I am because you are. Notion of I see the divinity in you, right? And this notion of what we call Zola, where not only is it about love, it's about my love will activate the healing power in you, right? So we're using all these concepts now that we've been learning since we've been in ABPSI, and come up with this kind of indigenous way of doing healing circles that quick, a few sessions, and we're finding real impact in the literature. Community-based, we're teaching and training the community how to do it, because at this point we need to do it in volume. It can't be, let's call out the people who got a license. We got time for that. Right. Folks are dying.
Exactly.
Like it's
right now, people are dying today.
Folks, right? And don't get me wrong, there was a lot of licensed people who came to the call, but that wasn't our criteria. We just made a call out to the ABPSI community, and we all came to help. So literally in circles on the internet, we're having this conversation about
we held trainings. We held trainings. We started off by having trainings. I was trained and then started to
They were doing it high volume. We also trained community members so they can continue to do it in their communities. We had EEC circles, were also community circles, but they were very long.
Yeah,
and
what are
they're
those
very helpful.
emotional
Most
emancipation?
circles,
Yeah.
that we were part of developing. It was our intellectual property that was put together to put that together. But it was a longer term program. We needed something quick. And so what we started to find out in 1, 2, 3 sessions, people were actually shifting and healing. Sometimes in one session with us, it all steeped in African deep wisdom, starting out with the rituals that we know as Black people, starting out with affirmations that we know about being who we are as African people, as Black people, talking to each other about the problems that we tend to keep it to ourselves or think this is only happening to me, or being ashamed about what happened to you. And then now we're having conversations like saying, oh shit, this happened to everybody. And they look like me, right? With and even as a facilitator, we're part of the circle because we too were going through COVID, right?
Yeah.
And it just turned into this institution that we're getting phone calls from Haiti, phone calls from the Black people in Ukraine. Shootings happen in New York. They're calling us to do these circles, so they just kind of exploded of this notion of taking African and divine. If we think about what happened, this was so divine led, right? And so the same thing when I talk about not having a license, quickly come together. What is our sweet spot? What is our superpowers? What do we do the best at? What are we good at? And in literally days, calling each other, putting together, let's just go for it, right? And it began to grow. And now we're collecting research. And now we have researchers in Yale that are actually looking at the impact that something that is 1 to 3 sessions has shifted this notion of what healing is. So I hear you
I
on
think
all the
to the
PhD
point where
license thing, right? I hear you, but we're talking about doing this in a session because it's about relationships.
real life.
Real living.
And I really like that you went into explaining how that came about and still the real life impact that it has had on people, because I think that white systems and structures get so caught up on protocol and processes and all this stuff that strips away the humanity, to where it's like, y'all are having us do exams and answer questions that are quite dehumanizing to internalize. And then I take it, I pass, and I have to take all this shit out my brain, because that's not actually how Black children or brown children receive care in real life. So I think it is important. And I saw someone earlier saying that this is like giving them a hope. I appreciate you sharing that. And I think this is what we wanted the conversation to be, is that there are many options outside of what white systems or structures say, how they say you can have an impact. There's other ways that we can do that. And of course, like, if this is the path for you, like, still definitely pursue that. We have conversations where we have people share their stories. If you go to our podcast, you'll hear those stories about how people persevered. And we wanted to make space to let you know that that's not the only way to have a real life impact on our community.
And then the third step is this, is that we need everybody to be in all spaces.
Yeah.
Because on those times, I got a group of girls that I need to get where they need to get, and I need your license. As a community, it's like, I know you passed your EPPP. Can you assist me here, right? So we need people in all spaces. I think about how long it would take to study for that test and sit for that test. I actually reflect on how much work I actually got done in my community instead of studying for that test, right? And so, in doing the actual praxis, right? But I need licensed people. So now the thing is, how do we unite? I think they have us more in conflict with each other instead of talking about how we complement each other, right? Because we do in many aspects. I got a Rolodex. I can call some folks. You can call me. I do internationally. Can you come along? And so how do we use this network? Because we do have one. And in the network and in the being radical is an interesting word. I'm going to say, well, I got to be radical. But I think that us radical people are actually normal, and the rest of you, no. Okay. I'll take that
Dr. Bethea, that's a whole nother live. That's a whole nother live.
That's a whole nother one. And so, but this notion of we all need to unite to do this work for our people, because we are not a monolith. Never have been, right? So we need everybody doing the work, but in unison and not using so much energy to be in conflict with each other, right? And having more of these conversations. What do you do? How do you do it, right? How we can help each other study. Maybe it's not for you now. Maybe you'll be, because I think about my horrible test taker. When he finally decided to get his master's, because he matured, he got better at it. It's like, okay, I can figure this out, right? And so ended up going to England, taking a test every other week, which was an interesting journey. But recognizing that our talents are talents, and that it's not a deficit because you can't pass the test.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a deficit to your genius, your work, your skills, who you are, who you're connected to, and who you belong to, right? That it's just a gatekeeping process. That if you're good at it, I hold you up. Yay.
Yeah.
If you're not, I still hold you up. It don't matter.
What did our ancestor Baba Joe White say about being, or maybe I think it was also an MLK speech about creative maladjustment, where we are existing within a society that is forcing us to exist as maladjusted people, and we have to find creative ways to exist. So kind of going to the whole radical thing, it's like we're actually not radical. The spectrum, or the point of where we are on the spectrum, has just shifted, because now people see the way we operate as abnormal. I'm gonna get to some of these questions, Dr. Bethea. So one quick one: how do you refer to yourself as, like, within the space that you do clinical work in, being that you are a non-licensed psychologist? Like, what title or terms do you use?
So I actually love this on my thing. It's like, I call myself Dr. Sharon Bethea, because I am. And I put under it certified in African Black psychology.
Yeah.
So proud of my certification in African Black psychology, which has gotten me jobs.
Yes.
Right? It's like,
yes. And we're gonna get to that too.
Yeah. So yes, Dr. Sharon Bethea with a certification in African Black psychology. Professor.
Awesome.
I'm full professor now. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a PhD.
All right. Yeah, if I just don't put all them.
And then if you could think off the
EPPP.
What'd you say?
What is the acronym you put after your name if you pass the EPPP? Because I don't know.
Is there one? Well, I don't know. Maybe LP. I've seen people say they're licensed psychologists, so maybe LP.
LP.
But I think it. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. If you can think off the top of your head, and if you think of them afterwards, I'll get that information from you and share it out somehow with the people. Alternative certifications or licenses that you sought that allowed you to do work like the group work that you referred to.
Mm-hmm. So, group work, Santrate therapy. I was kind of, I was always fascinated how many times I got jobs because I was certified in Santrate.
Can you spell that?
Especially, it's called Santrate therapy, where you do child therapy and they do their word in sand.
Oh, sand. Okay.
Santrate therapy. So, certified in that. I have.
Dang. Yeah, she said sand tray. Is she frozen for y'all too? Well, we're going to talk about the certification in African and Black psychology right after these questions.
All these little things that for child therapy, and many times in child therapy, the license is not as important, especially if they're already in a clinical setting. They're like, oh no, we got a person that's certified in art therapy, mask making, sand tray, and certification in African Black psychology. And our issue at our clinic or at our space is we don't know how to work with Black kids. So we got somebody over there got a license. Let's have her in the space because she'll do the work, right? Yeah. And so getting these specialist certifications have gotten me plenty of jobs. They're in the door. I became director of children's services without a license because I had other certifications. So it's like, okay, well, in my program, you have to have a license to do the work. So why don't you just come and run the program?
Yeah.
And then I actually trained it because I didn't need a license to train their therapists. And I was actually getting paid more than anybody else because I was director of the program. right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's how even the person said it. Run it. You don't need a license to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I did the work with my therapists who were under me, and I got to teach them Santre. So this notion of teaching how to do it, and so you just get creative with it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
one of the first things is find your sweet spot in your superpower.
Yeah.
Get a certification, and a certification is easier than, it's not a test. And then go out and to the world because it's in demand,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Another question, let's see. Somebody asked about what about us living and wanting, so people living and wanting to practice in the US, but they have a degree from outside of the US. This question makes me think about, and I'm gonna let you answer it too. This question makes me think about what you said earlier about finding communities and organizations that are already doing the work and being able to find your niche or sweet spot in there. So, like community mental health services, there are so many different community mental health agencies that need people to do the work, and they likely provide their own sort of certification or training to be able to come on board and support in that way. And yeah, Dr. Bethea, I'm gonna let you go ahead and answer.
Um, I think it's unfortunate that, which also understands gatekeeping,
Mm-hmm.
um, that they don't take degrees. I have traveled the world, and especially in spaces on the continent of Africa, and their curricular it is
Rigorous.
very, very rigorous. Oh my
Rigorous.
goodness,
Yeah, some of
very
these
rigorous.
folks will not be able to be standing on a leg.
Oh, not at all. So understand that's gatekeeping 101,
Yeah.
because it's very interesting now. Like for instance, right now, we have a shortage of doctors and nurses in America. That's how you know that this is gatekeeping and it's all illusion. And because we do, it has made our healthcare system horrifying. So all of a sudden, they take degrees. Like I was just in Kenya. All you have to do now is pass a test. And before, you had to redo your degree, get all these licenses, but not anymore. All you have to do is pass a test, which is not even that rigorous, and you become a nurse here because we need nurses, right? So that's how you know it's the gatekeeping. So, and unfortunately, if when we get enough of psychologists and nurses and doctors here, it'll go back again that those degrees don't count. So if you have a degree from another country, unfortunately, right now is a good time to have a degree from another country to go ahead and get a job because we have such shortages in these areas. And now we're talking about starting nurses starting at six figures, right? Because it's so short. But you'll have to do the work, right? Which is, again, a financial burden. You have to redo your degree, but do things like fight for interdisciplinary programs. So sometimes I have students who come over from other countries. I get a degree in interdisciplinary studies, right? Because what tends to happen is they use some of what you've done to get some of your credits, right? So at least you have to start, let's say if you're undergraduate, start as a freshman, you might have enough work or background to be a sophomore and junior. Then you only have that year to do. Specialized programs. So getting with people who are advocates for that and figuring out the fastest route to redoing your degree, redoing your certification. And then also um, working in your community that's here in America, because we don't tend to have those same rules, whether I was going to say legal. We find in those communities, say for instance, in the neighborhoods where there are Nigerian people, let's say we use an example, going into your own community, they don't tend to have those kind of restrictions around you doing work with their people, right? And so, so the fix may be finding a job with a group like that, or doing work overseas that's grounded here until you can get the money, time, and resources to actually um, upgrade, for lack of a better word, or
Yeah.
redo, yeah, redo your degree. But unfortunately, that's probably one of the hardest parts is when you have a degree from another country, when we don't need to exploit you. That's the only way I can say it.
Yeah,
And then doing that research right now, it's like, look into the fields that we're doing that, right? Look into the field, do the research. What fields are we taking people sight unseen, and go that route, right? Until you can change into the field that you want.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So much good information, Dr. Bethea. I know people may have follow-up questions, and you guys are welcome to continue to add those in the question box so I could keep better track of them. And then also just message us afterwards too, and somebody from our team can be able to get you a response or point you in the right direction. So, talk about the certification for African and Black psychology. Why, like, what is that? Why is it needed? And how where should we direct folks to get that? And who is eligible? Who can get that?
Woo. Big question. So, I'll start out with where you can go to kind of look at where it is. If you go to absci.org, under programs, go to certification in African Black Psychology. It'll take you to the actual landing page of certification in African Black Psychology, which I actually just logged onto. And so I'm just going to kind of read that first paragraph to get some kind of an understanding. So the certification in African.
See, now this will be making me think them people are clocking us. 'Cause why is it frozen again? I got your question noted, CJ.
Cosmological,
Dr.
aesthetic,
Bethea,
phenomenological, and hermetic
Dr. Bethea.
grounding in African discourse. Yes.
The people were they were blocking, so we didn't hear nothing you said. So you got to start from the top.
Okay.
You know how they feel about you opening your mouth.
Okay. So I don't know what you heard, but I was saying go to absci.org, go up to programs, and then go to certification in African Black Psychology, and it'll take you to the landing page. And what I did is kind of read the definition of the certification of African Black Psychology. I won't do it again. I always laugh because I had, as I had said before, I had Dr. Nobles as my professor, who his fault I'm in all this. I should say what a blessing. But in it, he says, which embodies the epistemological, ontological, cosmological, aesthetic, phenomenological, and hermeneutical grounding in African discourse. So Dr. Nobles is our wisdom keeper. So I always laugh at that says that, but pretty much saying that it is a certificate in African Black psychology steeped in being African throughout the diaspora, right? So this notion of what Dr. Hillier talked about when he says to be African or not to be, that is the question, right? And so how do we now take this science, right? And it is a science. It is a science, right? I've actually had a meeting with the trust earlier, and this notion of why we don't do APA's ethics. This science has been along long before there was an APA. This science has been along long before there was an America, right? So we're steeped in a wisdom knowledge that is from the beginning of time. So we talk about what is studying the soul. Africans did that, and everybody else stole it. Period.
Which is actually, because I know Psyche, Saku, where they stole that from, the Greeks and them. Tell the people a little bit about that so that they can understand what you mean by the soul.
So this notion of a science that studies the soul, or the Saku, and when Freud and them, and some of the philosophy, the Greek philosophies went over, because at one point there was only one university in the world. They talk about some of these great philosophers missing for 20 years. There was only one university, so they were sitting in Timbuktu. There was only one. Not telling nobody, right? Getting their degrees. Then degrees took that long. You even had to take a question from the Pharaoh. We talk about how hard it is when we defend. I think when you defend, you got to take a question from the Pharaoh, right? And so, and it was a long-term thing that you were called to, and sometimes it took up to 20 years. So when they learned our science, they brought it back to Greece, but they had to switch it and change it and delete to make sure it fit with them being supreme, right? So this whole notion of what we think of as psychology was, matter of fact, when they went in Freud's house, he had a whole back room with nothing but African deities that he worshipped. It's like that was his worship room from him studying all over Africa, not saying anything, right? And you actually go to his house now, and
got us hating ourselves.
yeah, y'all got us hating ourselves. And when you go into his house now, when you visit, in the back room is all his African deities that he worshipped and all the things that they stole from that. So this notion of what a science of psychology is did come from African people. So our certification is steeped in that deep, ancient wisdom. And so when a decision was made that we can certify ourselves, we ain't got to wait for APA. We ain't got to take no tests. We can certify ourselves because that's what they did, right? So why would we have the power to do that when we actually, it is our science? So at this juncture in our certification process, you fill out a portfolio to show your work. So what we do is we'll assess the work that you've done, looking at the impact and the work you've done for African descended people. Mm-hmm. So it's a process, right? You must be a member of ABPSI for 3 years, right? We have our own ethical standards, which we're proud of, that are actually published in their hours based on my eyes, right? There's a fee, of course, and our fee is minimal. And this is a good time to get in if you know you've done the work, because the fee will go up. But we want to get people certified at this point. There's a long application process. So if you go onto the website, you'll see what the application process is. And when we assess you, it's in several areas, right? I know we're called the Association of Black Psychologists, but we are a community. So i.e., we have people who do African yoga that's certified. So we certify in knowledge and knowledge production. So i.e., if you're a professor or a teacher, in community valorization, that's if you do your work in the community. Restorative practice, which is what you would know as having a private practice, right? And this notion of dissemination of the science, right? With with particular knowledge, skill sets, and experiences. And just a proudful plug. We're about to have a foundation course for 5 months, where you learn some of the foundational stuff. And so if you go to the website, you'll see all the stuff around that. It starts January 25th, once a month for 5 months. You can get CE credits for it, and you begin to learn the foundational knowledge. Because even in all of it, you have to pick 2 categories that you're good at. One that's your primary, one that's your secondary. And then you show your expertise in those areas, plus a basic knowledge of African deep wisdom, African worldview, African philosophers, lots of reading, a couple essays. Like, for instance, one of the essays is, what does it mean to be human, right? And
Yeah.
everybody's like,
I love how thoughtful you all were in this process, and like the elders and wisdom keepers, and thinking about the different angles that people can contribute, because it's not just the academia or the scholarly aspect that matters, but there are people who are doing work in the community, who have been working with kiddos, and it doesn't have to be that, again, you're licensed to prove that you're effective enough to do this work, but because you value yourself, you love your people, that's enough to show that you're able to do this work. So I love that. And then even just the concept of what it means to be human. When we think about African Black psychology, I like to think about just all that I read from the psychologists that came before me, and the other African wisdom keepers that talk about how the ways that we operate, where it's the virtues of Mayat, where it's harmony and love and all that, it benefits everybody for people to be on that page of humanity. Yeah.
And understanding to be African is to be human, period.
Yeah.
And so that notion of you understanding on a deep level, right? So there's a few essays, and then you turn in all your work, and then you are then assessed by a team, given a criteria. But the good thing about it is that we tell you what you're missing, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you may say, no, you have to be at least proficient, and if you're proficient, you can be certified. And there are people who, like, there's somebody who makes lots of money in court systems, because they are called as the expert in cases when they're Black people. Because she has a certification in African Black psychology, they call her and they pay her extremely good money.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So there's a reason
extremely good.
why it is, in some ways, as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh, this kind of sound kind of rigorous, but it's like you want to make sure that you're getting people who actually know what they're talking about and
Yeah,
have gone through this process in a very thoughtful way as well to receive that
absolutely,
certification. Okay.
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's
We're
dope.
all about the liberation of our people.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
does your work uphold the liberation of our people? Period. Our mission, right? And how do you do that? What work do you do? So artists do it, right? Because we know, and what I also love about, and I'm also on the committee, is that we were very thoughtful about understanding aspects of life that are important to African descended people.
Yeah.
We studied how we heal. It wasn't the 50-minute hour. It's not who we are. Grounding, all of it, touch.
Yeah.
And so we certify people who do the work for African descended people
Yeah.
around healing. And that's a music, art, design, right?
So in a way, it leaves
Talking,
room
spoken
for,
word, it's like all of it, right?
yeah, it seems like it also leaves room in a way for me as a person coming with this specific healing form or mechanism to be a contributor
Yeah,
to how I can do the healing within the bounds of, yeah, okay, awesome.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap it up. Thank y'all for sticking it out with us for a little bit over an hour. We could go so much longer, and we're open to other topics like this that you all would be open to us discussing. A few things that I will say before I let Dr. Thea, I'm gonna let you give the folks a word of wisdom, and then I'll just close it out with our radical psych stuff.
Okay.
Any thoughts that you have for the people? Encouragement, yeah,
Absolutely.
stuff that can help them just keep going.
Yeah. First and foremost, but understand whose you are and who you belong to, right? Not just family. We're talking about this notion of who we are as an African village, right? Understand we are the first humans, who we are, all the first knowledge. Name it all. It is in your
Mm-hmm.
DNA. So in this notion of when we're trying to figure out what to do, how to be, I always look in the mirror. We are what we've always been looking for. We
Yeah.
are. That's why we're still here, right? And so, how do we understand that notion of Ubuntu? I am because you are. And only in
Mm-hmm.
relationship to each other do we heal and do we succeed. So, we can fly, y'all. We really can. We really can fly. It's just that we've lost sight of that, right?
Yeah.
And so, not only how do we find our flight, right? Because we always want to give our children wings, right? How do we find our flight? And then how do we actually understand we are our brother's keeper? We are our sister's keeper. We are, right? And in that unity and understanding who we are as this first human being, right? And I'll stop. I always tell my class a couple things I tell my class the first day. Number one, I ask them about their belief in the creator. And then a lot of people know the scripture around God created humans in God's image. And so we talk about who the first human beings, and I say to them, so what does God look like? It looks like you. And this notion when Africans were like, I am God, because we were. And the other things that when you find out who you are, you will understand why you're magic and why you can fly, right? And so continue to, no test can stop that. Because the test
Yeah.
is put in place because they do know. So they gatekeep, because what happens, what happens
Mhm.
every time we get into a field, we take it over, right? And
Yeah.
so they've got to
Yeah.
have gatekeeping strategies. So feel proud of that. It's like, I didn't pass it 12 times. Woo woo. Right? So what do I do next?
Hmm.
Right? What is my skill? Right? What is my superpower? Be proud of that. And so
Yeah.
to be African or not to be, that is the question. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And do you ever have a text that you recommend them to?
Oh my
I know
gosh. So this is a
I know
hard
there's
one.
so many. I know there's so
There's
many. And
so
we're
many. So
like
many. And
good
and so I'm
start,
going
like
to
a
say
good
the first
starter.
one that popped in mind. Yeah. The first one that pops up in my head, but this is a hard read. Um, 2000 Seasons by Amar. Hard read. And it's one of those books that you can read 10 times, and every time it's like, I know I read this book 10 times. How come it sounds different every time?
Hmm.
So you kind of take it in and understand it as you mature. And it takes you from that moment when somebody came down from the mountaintop, a little girl, because it's like same thing, the oldest human being is a woman that they found, and pretty much told African people the more they moved away from Ma'at, the more they would have this 2000 seasons of drama, I'll just, for lack of a better word. And it takes you through who we are as a people, what happened to us, and why, our power around it. And so it's a hard read, but a slow read. And Amar has wrote some easier books to read. So his whole series of book are very spiritual, very personal, although very connected to our community. So if you just have some time and want to take a couple, read 2 or 3 or 4 pages a day, every other
Yeah.
day. But I
Yeah.
think you'll get some great insights of who we are as African people.
Yeah. Ashe. And then I will just end it off by saying thank y'all for joining us. We really appreciate it. We're always looking for feedback and volunteers to be part of the liberation movement. And specifically for us, it would be ways that we've been trying to advocate for more equitable practices within the field of psychology. So some things that we've been doing are asking folks, whatever state you're in, to show up to your state psychology or state board meetings and bring up, this issue. There aren't enough Black psychologists or psychologists of color who are out there licensed, able to do the work and have, felt defeated. So what can your board be doing about that? You could reach out to us for more information about like templates or what you could, if you need support with that. And then also looking into the certification for African and Black psychology on the ABPSI or the Association of Black Psychologists website. If there are people who have taken the licensure exam, not passed or passed, and you want to share your story, we
Yeah,
are
absolutely.
asking people to share their stories on our podcast. And yeah, there's other ways that we can support too. So just stay connected to us, reach out. I know people were asking about
Join
staying
ABSI.
connected.
Yeah.
Yes, and ABPSI, of course,
Join
like that.
ABSI. We have a
Yeah,
student circle if
ABPSI
you're a student.
is
Yeah,
what
we
has
have a
kept
student
me
circle if you're a
sane.
student.
So
Yeah.
definitely,
It
definitely
does keep you
join.
sane, our annual conferences, student
Hmm.
circle, and take the foundational course if you're able.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, thank y'all again. This live will end up being saved on our page and we'll also transmute it to be a podcast episode as well. And yes, let Dr. Lex join ABSI. Thank you, Dr. Bethea. Looks like they got you frozen again.
Yeah. Am I
Oh,
still frozen?
you're
I
good.
just want to say thank you for inviting me. This was so much fun. I appreciate it. I appreciate you. Um, you know how special you are to me anyway.
Oh, thank you. I love
For real,
you. Zola
Michelle.
up.
I love you too. Solo up on we, everybody.
Peace.
Take care.